Cybersecurity concerns are ever evolving. OT cybersecurity is even more complex, and it's so much more than just software and hardware. How do you stay on top of it all? Aaron Crow has over 25 years experience with cybersecurity, 15 of those years focused on operational technology across multiple industries, and he wants to help you. Welcome to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Industrial Defender. Now here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Hey, thanks for joining me today, Nick. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little about you, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, hey Aaron, my name is Nick Tsamis. I'm currently serving as Department Chief Engineer at MITRE Corporation. I'm focused on the cybersecurity protection of critical infrastructure. We recently stood up a new innovation center focused on the cybersecurity of our nation's critical infrastructure because there are some unique challenges that we need to address. So our innovation center is uniquely focused on that. Brief background on my end, I started my career as an aerospace engineer. I'm a space nerd by trade. I got very interested in the space game during my bachelor's education. I served as an aerospace safety engineer for a few years, then decided to pivot over into cybersecurity. So I've been doing that for a good portion of a decade now, specifically focused on operational technology. One of the key domains being industrial control systems. So one of the things I really like to bridge from my background is this kind of dance between safety principles and security principles. Oftentimes there are challenges associated with that, and that's kind of the intersection that we really intend to focus on with our work.
Oh, that's outstanding. Yeah, so much when you really narrow it down, it all comes down to risk, and in operational technology, it's really around availability and safety, right? And operators understand that when I'm running my plant, I need to make sure it's available and I do it safely, so I'm not hurting people, I'm not damaging equipment, all those types of things. And when you can break down cyber risks that translate into things that they understand in that way, it's easier for them to adopt them and incorporate them. So how are you guys doing that with MITRE? Kind of give everybody a high level of what is MITRE, what is the MITRE framework, and then obviously we can get into more of the OT side stuff that you guys are doing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So MITRE operates not-for-profit FFRDCs. We work across government, we pair with industry, and we're specifically focused on challenges that address safety issues for our nation at the end of the day. We overall operate as a not-for-profit company, and we're specifically, with our cyber portfolio, we're really looking to build out, worldwide community of cyber defense. One of the challenges is not just addressing technical solutions, but being able to employ whole of nation solutions, whole of globe solutions, because so much of our current ecosystem, right, is tied to the international landscape. So MITRE operates multiple different research and development centers, specifically focused at tackling the nation's challenges in things like homeland security, national defense, healthcare initiatives. And by having such a large portfolio, it really helps that we're able to pull on internal subject matter experts when we go into a specific domain. Oftentimes I say, if you're hearing about a concept for the first time, you're bound to find 5 or 10 subject matter experts who have been doing this for a decade.
Right.
So it's an incredible resource for us to be able to pull on to have that capacity internal in our company.
Oh, that's outstanding. Yeah, it's amazing that the amount of knowledge, and especially in OT. I grew up in power utility. A lot of my time is spent in that critical infrastructure. And, my dad worked in the industry for 40 something years, and a lot of these verticals, you see folks that are specifically on the plant side and the operation side, right, is people work in these industries for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they have this wealth of knowledge that they're more than willing to transfer to you. You just have to sit down and work with them, right?
Yes. That tribal knowledge we know and love.
Exactly. So how do you translate that into the cyber side? Like specifically, what does that look like on the cyber side? IT and OT, I guess that is.
Yeah, so a few frameworks that you're probably familiar with. So MITRE, for several years, we've been championing the ATTACK project, which is really looking to help standardize the vernacular. How do we speak about cyber? How do we reason about it? The I think large benefit that we've seen out of that is just reducing the barrier for multiple stakeholders to be able to participate, collaborate effectively, communicate across industry, academia, consortia lines, and effective and clear communication, I think, is really important for us. The cyber discipline is still highly ambiguous, right? There's still a lot of uncertainty out there. What's right? What do I do with this vulnerability? Am I presented with risk because of this thing? Being able to use a common vernacular to describe the types of things that we're grappling with, I think, is a huge enabler. Another tool, right? So we use the attack framework to be able to describe how adversaries are ultimately disrupting infrastructure. When we talk about that on the operational technology side, our extension for attack into the industrial control system space is now creating a knowledge base and creating a vernacular specific to those systems. So when we pair both of those together, that helps us now understand inherently, how do I defend against IT flavored attacks, and how can I start to protect against OT flavored attacks? Ultimately, we need to stitch both of those together to ensure that OT missions are really secured at the end of the day.
Yeah, I see that problem a lot is a lot of the cyber people, a lot of the folks that are focused on attacks and, response, IR, that kind of stuff, right, is that they're really leaning on the cyber and the IT side. And when something happens in the OT space, they don't really know what to do about it. They don't have that playbook. It's not as complete. They don't have the same language. They're not speaking. They don't really understand what good looks like, or is it supposed to act like this? Because it acts differently in OT than it does in IT. So having that common language, I think that's one of the superpowers that I bring, because I've worked with IT. I've had IT in my career a lot, and I've also done OT. So I've been on both sides of the table. So I can speak both sides, like I speak both languages. So that helps me to mediate. But having something like a framework that I can call to, and everybody's using that as, this is the language we're speaking. Make sure that we're talking about the same thing. When I've done tabletops, IT people are quick to call it an incident. Whereas on the OT side, I'm not as quick to call it an incident, because that means certain things in the OT space that you may not be ready to actually classify it as an incident yet.
No, that's exactly it, right? Being able to have everyone come to the table and to your point, right? I'm pointing to a word, right? Here's the definition. We all know what it means ahead of time. Those still present real challenges when we're trying to grapple with cybersecurity issues in these environments, for sure.
Yeah, and that doesn't even count the complexity and all the technical things. That's just the language. That's the bare minimum that we have to be able to do to talk about these really complex things. Is we have to be able to speak the same language so that we know what we're talking about. Because we've got these nation state actors, these APTs, all these things coming at us, and we can't even speak the same language. Like that seems like a very entry level things that we need to get figured out.
Totally. And the back and forth, right? Just being able to make some of those connections ahead of time, right? This is, to me, not going to be solved by, one set of elite professionals that are going to secure all of the nation's infrastructure overnight, right? We need to start working at this. We need to start forging those relationships. Cybersecurity absolutely plays a role in that mission, but operations does too. And if we're trying to apply cybersecurity principles in a vacuum and not understanding that we're running a process, and that process comes with a lot of constraints, things that I can do, things that I absolutely cannot do, we need to make sure that our cyber guidance is applicable and amenable to the processes that we're maintaining at the end of the day.
Yeah, a lot of times it's as much the translation of why it's different and how it's different as it is the language, right? So I can't do this in IT, but this is how I would do it. So a great example of that is in IT, my answer is usually patch the problem, right? I'm going to push a patch, I'm going to push an update, I'm going to update the firmware, update the operating system, whatever. That's not usually the response or the first step that I'm going to take in an OT space. I've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of OT devices. I can't patch them all. Some of them don't have patches because they're really old, all those types of things. But being able to translate that's an example of something that's really difficult for an IT person that has spent all of their time in IT. The answer has always been patch. That, it's like used to back in the day when I'd call tech support in Dell or whatever. The first thing they'd ask, have you updated it? Have you rebooted it? Right? Have you turned it off and on again?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And why that's different, right?
And even to the point where this thing is presenting too much risk in my environment, we can absolutely have the conversation. Let's rip it out, right? The video conferencing software, it's not good. Okay, we're happy to take a process efficiency and business productivity. You can't do that, right? You don't go into a factory floor and it's like, oh, this conveyor belt PLC, no worries, we just got to rip that thing out. The risk appetite for being able to implement mitigations absolutely is something that needs to be considered.
Well, and it also goes to, because again, you led with this, right, is it's all about availability and safety. So in addition to trying to protect against bad actors and cyber misconfigurations and insider threats and all the different things that we're trying to look at, the other thing that we're trying to do is make sure we don't break it. And that's just, hey, I'm a good guy. I'm implementing a good tool. We all agreed on it, but my implementation of that tool brings the system down. That's still a problem, right?
Absolutely.
And those are the problems that has historically caused the most issues in OT in my experience, and the ones that I've seen firsthand. Those are the ones that have caused the biggest impact, because I'm trying to do something good and it impacts something, and then they get a bad taste in their mouth and they don't want to do anything again because they don't trust you, they don't trust the tool, they don't trust IT, whatever those things are. So now they're gun shy, and now you've got to earn that trust back again, because make sure that you're not going to break their stuff, because at the end of the day, they're responsible for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's understanding who's on the hook for this, right? Who's responsible for keeping that up and running. And then how do we overlay starting to chip away at this extremely risk-averse culture, which is well-founded. Absolutely, we need to make sure that we're maintaining safety-critical processes. But I don't think the answer can be don't touch the components as long as it's living on the factory floor, right?
Right.
Another tool that MITRE has been building out is our Caldera tooling. Caldera is an open source. We typically call it an adversary emulation platform. It's a scalable tool that we can adapt to be able to execute adversary emulation actions, which effectively represent attack techniques at the end of the day. So being able to operationalize how adversaries are disrupting computing components, we're able to put that hands on keyboard and actually go execute effects. Some of the work that my team has been working on has been extending that into the operational technology space. So just this last month, we released our first set of plugins that now allow us to operate natively within specific protocols that we see down on the floor, right? Interacting with logic devices, being able to speak the native protocols that the processes do. And that's really something that I want to be able to present to the community to help us chip away at this risk appetite. I think if we look at this on the spectrum, it's like never touch that device ever unless my contractor or my vendor's here. On the other end of the spectrum, it's just like, okay, throw anything you want at it, right? We've got to start operating in the middle there, which is gaining an appetite to feel more comfortable and feel more appropriate that when we interact with these devices, we can contextualize, we can understand what's going on. So I think that's the real big paradigm shift that I'm hoping the industrial control community will start to accept over these coming years ahead.
Well, that's awesome. That's super exciting, because again, I've been doing this a long time, and before you would bring in a pen tester, and they would bring in their IT tools and processes and capabilities and attack vectors, right? And they would hit the firewall, they would hit the HMIs, they would hit all that type of stuff. And they would say, yeah, your firewalls look good, or because I'm not going to let them on my control network. I'm not going to. So I'm putting them on the outside. I'm putting them on my corporate network and saying, what can you do from the outside? I'm doing it during an outage. Or I've also been fortunate enough to build multiple very large scale labs. So, real world hardware, not just virtualization. So actual hardware, set up the same way with running configurations, all that kind of stuff, as a safe place to do stuff, right?
Check.
But same thing, when I'm bringing in a third party, a red team, a purple team, a blue team, right? They're using their IT skills in an OT space, and most of them are not OT specific folks. Mm-hmm. So having some kind of framework in that open source with the ability to put those plugins that, yes, I can hit, because there's a lot of IT stuff in OT as well. So I've got firewalls and VMware and HMIs and all that kind of stuff. So that's good. But being able to bolt on those additional plugins that I can also have some pivots for, my OT devices. And I know you also talked about, or I've seen talking about it on the Caldera, is also using those in factor acceptance tests and SATs, So as you're working with your vendor, you do those things in their factory. So they're signing off, hey, I found this problem, this bug, this vulnerability. Let's fix that before you deliver it to my site. It's another box that you can check on that FAT.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly the intent, right? Not needing to reinvent a new set of tools, understanding their specific constraints, understanding their unique operating environments, parameters that we need to operate within, 100%. But being able to now leverage a unified tooling. So now I can operationalize, right? I can use my same agent. I can use my same type of access. I just now can start speaking on the process side of things. That's exactly where we wanted to go. The other kind of key point that you mentioned there, right, while Caldera is generally and was created to execute adversary emulation actions, that is not the only use case, right? Absolutely, right. We're seeing, right, if I just generally talk about what Caldera for OT delivers, it is a way to standardize and reduce the barrier for operators to natively speak multiple OT protocols, right? At its core, that's really what we're trying to get towards. Just like we would abstract very specific actions to a technique, we can now reinstantiate going from a technique to a very specific procedure or specific action within an industrial control environment. That's what we're trying to get towards. Taking a basic action like asset inventory, can I have a tool that I don't need to have, vendor proprietary lock-in, or I need to have 10 of these tools on my network because that only speaks that one specific protocol. Being able to provide a means to standardize data access for a FAT or a SAT or something like that, I think there's extreme utility, and that's really the core kind of architecture about how we've tried to craft the Caldera for OT plugins.
Have you seen it being accepted and adopted from early adopters and folks? I mean, I know it's exciting to me. I see the vision and I see how valuable it is running FATs and doing it manually in the hardware without tools to standardize on. It's super powerful for in my perspective to be able to do that across customers, across multiple sites and multiple verticals, and bringing my OT and my IT together. That's super powerful. But what has your adoption seen so far? I know it's probably early, so.
Yeah, so let me talk kind of about the background real quick. This tool really was kind of ideated out of our work with DHS CISA, and they've been a phenomenal partner in supporting us in this development work. Through some work that they manage through an environment called the Cellar, we are working directly with industry participants, bringing them into real hands-on keyboard industrial control system test beds. The entire purpose of that is to be able to, in a low-risk environment, fire some cyber capabilities, do real effects, as you mentioned, right, in a safe and controlled environment. These are not operational systems, but it's real hardware in the loop, right? We've got real things tied to it at the end of the day. Sometimes our participants that are there, this is the first time that they're hands-on keyboard from a defensive perspective. This is sometimes the first time that they're seeing an ICS communication go across the wire. So it provides a really low barrier, low risk way to get some hands-on, get familiar with what's going on with this stuff. That was kind of the rationale for why we created this tooling to begin with. We, over the course of about the past 2 years, working directly with CISA, we have exercised with almost 20 different participants in the space.
Oh, wow.
And by and large, we've had overwhelmingly positive response, right? When we're working with teams to share how adversary actions really materialize on the network, it's extremely important that we're able to take a standardized approach, right? One step at a time to be able to say, this is a type of technique. We're going to show you what that looks like. We're going to generate host-based artifacts. We're going to generate network-based communication flows. And this is a way to start exercising process, to start translating knowledge into action. And that Caldera framework really provided a nice basis for us to build into a standardized and repeatable process to execute some of these types of actions.
Yeah, man. I mean, the sky's the limit when you get that, right? Because again, you talked about it before, but it's training. It's being able to, go through exercises, doing it enhances your tabletop, right? Because they don't know what these things look like. So I've seen a lot of tabletops that weren't very valuable because they don't know what it's going to look like. So they're doing these tabletops, but they're not accurate. Like they're not realistic. So
Absolutely.
having more realistic tabletops and having more realistic response times and it not be the first time, you don't want after, right of bang or after an incident, um, the first time you've seen or responded to something like that, right? You want to have seen this in a safe space. You want to have, oh yeah, okay, I've seen that before. It's not the first time I've been looking at these types of tools or this data, and I know what to look for. I know what good looks like. I know what bad looks like. I know how to respond to these things. All of these things are just beneficial in improving my cyber response, improving the knowledge from my IT side as well as my OT side. Because the cyber analysts probably have higher fidelity skill sets on that stuff, maybe than many of the OT people. That's a generic thing to say because it's not always true. But many of them have had more exposure to it than the OT side. But this is another way to bring that language barrier up, to really get those experiences in that safe space where not everybody has the ability to build their own lab. But this is a way that they can do it without having to necessarily, spend a whole bunch of money and have somebody like me design them a brand new lab that they implement and manage and run.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's right the last thing you want to do, right, and we all wear the scars of being on site with an incident response, and it's like we're going to crack open the data set for the first time that nobody has seen. I'm pretty sure those logs are in there. I'm pretty sure we're tracking the PCAP. You don't
Right.
want that to be the first time, right?
Yeah.
And this is really with CISA support specifically. They've done a phenomenal job bringing in underserved operators, being able to bring in international participation. They've really done a great job in providing that environment that we can go take some of those risks in a very, very comfortable and collaborative environment. That in itself, having that not be the first time that we're starting to ask those questions, starting to dig through data to understand what can I and what can I not get out of this tool, that's absolutely, I think, the first step that we need to be perpetuating in the domain right now. The other piece you mentioned, right, on doing a TTX and we're going to start white carding some stuff, right? Absolutely, right. It drives the technical people crazy because if you can't adequately describe or accurately describe how those effects are going to materialize, our TTX is likely providing maybe not even zero value, potentially negative value, right? We may
Right.
be driving ourselves towards, yeah, I'd absolutely be able to do that. There's a big difference between, no, I understand if I put this message on the wire, your tool will pick it up.
Right.
I would love to go do it, right? Let's go do it in a safe space. Let's go build
Yep.
it in a 100% representative environment where we have authorization to actually go execute these things.
Yep.
But now you bring in your tool and say, I'm going to generate that log. I want to see you kick off an IRP based off of that data set that we've generated for you. There's a big difference between, oh yeah, I guess we're going to crack open the incident response plan for the first time. I don't want that to happen in a real event.
No, that's definitely not the time you want to practice it. And again, coming back to the practice thing, red teams happen a lot on the IT side. We rarely, I've been in very few places that have actually let a red team or any type of exercise like that really happen truly in an OT space because it's so there's so much impact. There is no outage window on Friday night that I can do this, right? The plant runs 24/7. You want your electricity to work all the time. It doesn't shut down on the weekend so that you can do fun little games like this, right? So they really haven't seen those. And again, most places don't have a representative lab that they can do stuff like this, nor do they have the expertise to execute it even if they did. So there's a whole bunch of factors that stops them. So having something like this that makes it the price of entry, the barrier to get into and start getting value out is so much easier because I don't have to be an expert. Like I can take this and you've got the framework there that I just have to kind of incorporate and use that has the ability to pull that out for the OT side, right?
Absolutely right. Yeah, and one of the things, one of the common kind of questions we get back on this is like, okay, cool. So you've got like a drag and drop, like I point it at my thing and I click a button and it does stuff, right? And it's like, well, kind of, to the point that, if I give you a car and I can say, you can drive wherever you want. If you don't know where you're going, you're good luck, right? I hope you get there.
Yeah.
Similar thing, right? We built out these capabilities that absolutely need to be tied into an operational environment, right?
Sure.
A BACnet plugin, right? We're not reinventing the wheel. We're using open source, well accepted industry implementations here. We're extremely transparent about what's happening under the hood. However, we're exposing a unified binding. So now I can use ideally trusted binaries, right? And that's risk acceptance that needs to occur on the organization that we're working with. But now I'm being very transparent of what type of actions I'm able to tee up ahead of time. We're able to get approvals to say these are the type of actions we feel comfortable executing. These we do not feel comfortable yet. And that level of transparency and kind of showing your work, I think, is really important, right? We started our conversation on common vernaculars, and here we are now. Can I use this as a way to describe in unambiguous terms, tell me the 3 things you're doing? And don't say, I'm just going to like profile your devices, right? Tell me you're going to do a read property on these 3 objects in there and show me that you can do that 6 times in a standardized way. Now we're starting to build comfort. Now we're starting to operate with more of a risk appetite to say, I can get more comfortable with the components that I own at the end of the day. And that, I think, is really where we need, again, to shift our perspective on taking baby steps towards that end goal rather than throwing Hail Marys.
Yeah, and it goes back to communication, right? And earning trust. Because again, in these spaces, if I'm an asset owner and I'm running this plan and you walk in with all this fancy stuff that I don't understand what you're talking about, and you're talking about talking my industrial protocol to my devices, man, I'm going to be super uncomfortable with that.
Get out.
So if you can explain what I'm going to do, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how it's going to be low impact, I get to choose what those boundaries are, what those thresholds are, right? I get to say when's enough, right? I get to say which devices you talk to, which networks you do it, what frequency you're doing it at, all that type of stuff. I start feeling more comfortable in this because I realize, hey, I'm not just going to go, do bad things to these environments. I know what I'm talking about, and we're going to work together in something that you're comfortable with, I'm comfortable with, we're all comfortable with. And that's a difference, I think, in OT that I see than OT or IT is, that what I've called it many times, and other organizations call it like a pre-job brief, right? So I'm going to sit down, we're going to talk about what we're doing, how I'm going to communicate, where I'm plugging in, what protocols, like what's the out plan, how do I know when enough is happening, like all of those things. We're doing all that stuff in advance. Like again, it's over communicating because we're trying to get these environments and these stakeholders comfortable with these processes because, like you said in the beginning, we can't just say, I'm not going to do anything in my environment. Just ignore me, right? I'm going to disconnect or, just leave it alone. It's fine. I've never had an incident. Like we know we've got to do more, but we can't just force it down these stakeholders' throats either because they're responsible for it. So we have to do it in a way that makes them comfortable while still getting the data and the capabilities out that we need. And things like this really help that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it brings me to another story that I'll share. When we started our work, again, with DHS there, one of the things that we quickly found out, we started executing more traditional red versus blue type of exercise.
Right.
After a few, it became very quickly apparent that we really needed to tailor our activities to the maturity and the learning objectives that our participants were bringing in, right? We saw a vast amount of difference in the adeptness of, I've never heard of these protocols before, vice, I super understand these every single day, to, I don't, we're not ready to talk about the red effects, right? I want to understand more on the threat hunting side of things. Help me use open source tools. Great. Sure. And we can exercise those different type of capabilities. But to that point, right, we can, and some of the things that we've built into Caldera as a framework, we can effectively dial in the level of automation we want to execute, right? So if we got a super mature team that we're doing reps and sets with, we understand they know how to hunt for certain objectives, I can go create a module, right? Hey, here are 3 techniques. We're going to operationalize them into that environment. Boom, we're generating data sets. That's
Sure.
great if we're looking to test out detection engineering capabilities. That's a really nice automated test harness. On the other end of the spectrum, oftentimes when we're working with other participants who don't have that level of familiarity or they have some specific learning objectives, we really take more of the purple team approach, right? Where the red team is slowing the pace down, we're sitting with the blue team, we take an action at a time, and we might, maybe throughout the entire day, we execute two things, but we're debriefing them, we're providing learning content, we're sharing, look, when we did this type of thing over here, it generated these artifacts. You've never heard of those before? Cool. Let's kick off a little learning exercise to figure out what you're actually seeing on the network. So that ability for us to really use that tool in a few different ways has provided, I think, really tremendous value for us to be able to dial in and kind of create a custom a learning module, so to speak, for our participants.
That's awesome. And how have you seen the before and after? So coming in, if let's use the folks that don't know as much, right? What is the before and after of, hey, I don't know anything. They go through this process. What is their comfort level after that fact?
Yeah, by and large, it's been night and day seeing some of the learning that goes on. The single metric that I personally use, right, is being able to observe the process and the critical thinking that our teams are going through, right? Being able to come in and not even knowing what questions to ask on day one, but then, say 2 days later, being able to say, I've seen this process before. It's a different protocol, it's a different data set, we're at a different part of the network, but I can now start to think through how would that action materialize in a host-based artifact that I could look at, that I have in my scene today? Yeah. How would that materialize in a network communication that might look interesting? Being able to ask more critical questions that are commensurate with the actions that they can hypothesize adversaries are doing, that alone, I think, is an enormous indication that learning is occurring, right? And that being able to execute some exposure here is really providing knowledge to the team that they'll continue.
And man, that is so powerful, right? Is going through an exercise where you're learning, the light bulb moment comes on, and they're able to see things from a different perspective. Obviously, we're talking about people that are extremely intelligent. They're very capable. They're very good at what they do, right? But they just don't have the experience to do this stuff. It's just different. It's a different skill set. It's a different experiences. You and I have a different background than a lot of people that are running these plants. It doesn't make us better. It's just we have different experiences.
Absolutely.
So when we can share those things and you can start bolting on these different capabilities and these different, really, I see it as perspectives, like being able to see the problem from another angle now. It opens the world up to, I'm not always a hammer trying to hit a nail, right? Now I've got a screwdriver and a saw, and I'm able to see different problems now, because when all I see is nails and I'm a hammer, that's all I see. That's the only problem that kind of stands out for me.
Totally. That's absolutely right. The other thing I think is interesting to note, being able to, again, kind of coming back to some of these learning objectives, in interacting with participants, we found out very quickly, and we knew it, right? There's no one size fits all approach, but being able to, again, tailor the way we execute our actions, but also be able to employ additional means for team to learn other portions, other perspectives of it. Case in point, oftentimes we'll be able to, and really what we're trying to do with open sourcing this tooling is commoditize access, right? If I'm tasked with network defense of these type of things, and I'm too scared, or the barrier is too high, or I feel uncomfortable working with the tooling that a red team is employing on my network, we're not perpetuating an appropriate environment. So what we'll actually do is, right, it's open source out there for a reason, right? We're showing how we're building bindings that now network defenders who maybe had never had the opportunity to crack open some of that tooling and look at what's actually happening under the hood, they feel comfortable doing that. Right. And by publishing all of this work, what we're really intending to do is reduce that barrier, right? By and large, we're not exposing anything that is overly sensitive, but the barrier is high because it is highly decentralized. It's all over the place. It looks different from vendor to vendor, from protocol to protocol. By standardizing that approach, we're really hoping to create more of a familiar and open environment for some of the people who have never experienced that to try it out for the first time.
Yeah, yeah, it's the whole, you can give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. You teach him to fish, he can eat for a lifetime, right?
That's right.
It's great to get a red team every once in a while, but if you can teach your internal team, does that mean you should never hire a third party red team? Absolutely, you should hire a third party red team because that's a completely different conversation. But having somebody with skill sets that you can do some of these things in house, you're not waiting a year before you get a full report and analysts come in and look at your things. You're able to do some of those things in house. So you're building better products. You're building a better widget. You're looking at things before they become problems. So with the ultimate goal of the red team comes in and there's not many findings. Like they're always going to find something, but you don't want it to be like my 8th grade English paper that's just red everywhere from my professor, my teacher that just put red all over my paper.
Right. No, that's exactly it. And I think, right, the key takeaway in my mind, right, is we're serving two different purposes, right?
Yeah.
As, right, being able to execute, right, and having been boots on ground these engagements, the best thing that you can do is work with a customer and they're like, hey, here are the things that keep me up at night. Here are my risk areas. I'd love to be able to tailor our assessment to this type of thing. Well, hopefully with this tooling, right, we can now start teeing up better questions. We can now start asking better questions of our red team. Hey, we think there's something over here. Can you really hammer on that? We think we've got this kind of covered down. Focus less on that. That's terrific because the purpose of the red team is really to, again, illuminate those risk areas, prove them out, and then ultimately identify areas where we can apply appropriate mitigations when appropriate. That's, I think, really how this cycle should be working. So not intended by any stretch to replace tooling or be a push button solution that, red teams are now obsolete, but we can now do some homework ahead of time, right? Start testing some of this stuff out, provide a report. Hey, here's what we've done. Here's what we do on a regular basis. How can you use that information to ultimately create an offering that's going to provide more value to the organization at the end of the day?
So I'm gonna throw you on the spot. What's an example of a use case that you've either thought of or had a user in an OT space wanting to use the tool for something like that? Hey, I'd really love to standardize my use case, really look at this type of scenario in my environment where they've been able to use your product to kind of focus on that.
Yeah, I think so. Two things come to mind. One, a whole host of, I'll call them detection engineering use cases, right? One is we're deploying custom logic. We have maybe open source tools and we've built a framework. We're integrating into a SIEM. We don't understand the coverage or what actual protections we're getting out of, say, detection suite A, vice detection suite B. Being able to provide standardized tests that we can, with a high level of certainty, generate the exact same data sets every single time, that's enormous, right? When we're baselining, trying to compare apples to apples, you need to make sure you're controlling the test environment. So that's been, I think, a really large community that we're seeing a big need out of right now is building out the detection, being able to validate those, and frankly, extending our current view of where detection should be going. Great, it's providing that information, but I'm seeing there's additional information in the payload that I'm not parsing out right now. Can I push the envelope there? I think the second piece is just, again, maybe on the protocol familiarization side of things, right? Some ways this manifests is providing broad data collection. A subset of this, asset identification, right? I want to be able to reach into all devices, and I know in this enclave I've got 3 or 4 different protocols. I want to reach down, I want to push a button, and now I don't need to execute 600 different commands, and I don't need to go across 6 different consoles, and I'm messing up the syntax. We can create automated scripts that are now just hooking into the underlying protocols at the end of the day to provide extremely rich asset identification information. That alone, not intending to override existing inventory capabilities, but to be able to provide validation, be able to schedule some of these tests, putting that capability into the owner's hands, we've seen a very large demand signal for as well.
No, that's awesome. And there's too many, there's a lot of products out there. There's great products in the commercial space, et cetera, but having validation is so important, right? Making sure, do I have 2 tools that can give me the data? Awesome. Do they match? Because if they do, I'm really confident in that data now.
Absolutely.
It's not like I've got it once. I don't need it from the other guy. Like if you've got it twice, then you're just validating that those things, do they match? Like there's a huge power. And again, coming from the space industry, I'm sure you have a lot of those scenarios. Nuclear environments are the same, right? I've got tertiary tools. I've got 3 different sensors looking at the same thing, a temperature, a pressure, a valve position, any of those types of things. I've got 3 sensors to do it because I want to validate all 3 of those say the same thing. And if they don't, which one is primary? When do I send an alarm? I send an operator. Like those are valuable things. And we do that all the time in OT. Why would we think it's any different on the cyber side or on the technology side, right?
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing about all of that, right, is we can immediately, right, if I've got the red hat on, right, I can understand how that information is useful from an adversary perspective, right? But we never said adversary once that entire time, right? This is now just commoditizing access to the data that system owners own, but don't necessarily feel comfortable right now with its management. And that's a beautiful thing, right? We need to get, again, more comfortable with being able to operate with the types of data, the enormous troves of data. How do I organize that? How do I systematically analyze how that data over there should look like this, even though it's in a different format? How do I look at it the same way? Am I incurring different risk? Am I able to mitigate issues the same way between those 2 protocols, say?
Yeah, OT is such a big, vast space, right? And we're so far behind the 8 ball as far as behind IT, and there's just so much to do with so many complex architectures and protocols and different architectures and environments, and the laundry list of things that we have to solve is huge. But that doesn't mean you do nothing, right? And things like this, you start chipping away. Like how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time, right? You start doing the basics. And I know I scream it all the time, but asset inventory, understanding what your assets are, the specific details, more than just, hey, that's a thing and this is the MAC address of it, right? The more information I know about that device, it's going to help me in incident response. It's going to help me tying vulnerabilities to it. It's going to help me understand what those alerts that are coming from that device actually mean. Because if it's coming from a Windows machine, it's something different than if it's coming from a PLC, right? So I need to look at it through the right lens. And the more information I can have about those devices, the better off I am long term to get those advanced, respond and recover and incident, all of the IR and the cool stuff that we want to do, XDR, et cetera. Without that asset inventory, it's really hard to do any of that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a piece of it, right, is being able to contextualize what I'm talking to at the end of the day from a process perspective, right?
Right.
Super cool. I've got an IP address. Super cool. I've got a MAC address. Cool. Show me the serial number. Show me the version. All great. Right. When you tell me that thing controls a pump versus a vacuum, or an electric device a building automation system component, I'm now able to understand what are the potential impacts, what are the risks that I'm actually incurring with being able to have open communications or not monitoring that data flow over there. That contextual information from a process perspective is absolutely something that we need to start baking into our asset inventories.
100%. Yeah. The analogy I always give is I've got 2 PLCs. They're the same version, same make, model, everything, whatever version you want to call it. But one's controlling the ice machine in the break room and the other one's controlling the turbine. Which one do you care about? Because they have the same vulnerabilities. When you run a vulnerability search, they're the same vulnerability, right? But I'm going to obviously respond to the one that's controlling the turbine over the ice machine. I'm going to make people mad on the ice machine, but it doesn't shut my business down.
You don't need cold drinks? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Being able to contextualize why I care about some of this, breaking it out. And right, we talked about this too, right? It's the multiple perspective piece, right? This is inherently a multidisciplinary problem, right? We're not going to solve this with cyber only. We're not going to solve this from ops only. Burying our head in the sand and saying don't touch it is not going to be a viable approach. So being able to allow a transparent and open conversation, all of those are things that certainly we're doing through tooling. We're trying to perpetuate that community there. But ultimately it comes down to the stakeholders to buy off and have the willingness and appetite to have those conversations and speak across the lines.
Yeah, and really translating all those things back to, ultimately, all this stuff comes back to a business risk. Whether it's a cyber risk, it's a safety issue, it's a liability, it's availability, all of those things really tie back to, I have to be able to translate that into all the way up to the CFO, to the CEO, right? To get funding for, am I going to spend money on these things, this time? And it's not just technology, right? It's people, process, and technology. It's all of those things together. And I had a mentor tell me a long time ago that all business is the people business. So you have to be able to, whether you're the janitor or the CEO, you have to be able to sell and explain things to other people. Because if you can't, it doesn't matter how great your product is, or how great your solution is, or how great you are. But if you can't convince other people of why and why they should care, then it doesn't matter. Like there's a lot of products that are probably greater than others that actually win. And it's not necessarily the technology that made them win. It was somebody was able to take those complex things and make you understand why it was important, why you should care, so that you take that forward. Oh yeah, the light bulb goes off, and now he's on my team as well. Let's go get somebody else, right?
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree, right? And I think one of the challenges we're grappling with is with the advent of a lot of technology in the space right now. At the end of the day, this is always going to boil down to a human endeavor, right? Yeah. Cybersecurity is going to be. Process control is going to be. That doesn't mean humans are flipping the bits manually, but there's always going to be at some point a human in the loop, right? Yeah. And I hope I'm wrong, and we've got this AI ML advent solves all of our problems in life, but I just don't see it happening in the near term here. Until then, I think it's imperative that the tooling that we built is incorporating human in the loop workflows, right? I should provide a tool that allows a human to make a critical decision when they need to, rather than have them go identify 6 different data elements that they need to bring back and do this complex calculation in their head, right? I want to present very easy analytic outcomes and allow a human to think critically. It's what we do well. Right. The tooling should ultimately be supportive and not replace humans in the loop. Right. And that transparency and openness that we're really trying to drive with what we're doing with Caldera, I'm hopeful that we continue to build on that and allow humans to be a part of the problem and a part of the solution, rather than just observing on the side.
Sure. Yeah, that's it, right? Is you have to be able to do that, and that's the only way we're going to get from where we are to where we need to go, right? We've got to continue to move forward. We can't stay where we're at, or we're going to. I really hope the environment, the OT in general, the landscape, no matter what vertical, doesn't have to wait until something really bad happens to take that step, right? I'm hoping that I see progress. I see people moving in the right direction. I'm hoping that there's not some big catalyst event that pushes us faster. I'm hoping that we just naturally go that direction, because we all know it's the right thing to do. I see us all moving that direction anyways. Hopefully we get there before that big catalyst event happens.
Hear, hear.
So all this said, we said a lot of fun stuff, a lot of kind of pie in the sky type things. But what's in the next 5 to 10 years? What's one thing that you see that you're excited about coming up over the horizon, and maybe something that is a little concerning, kind of on that same topic of that's coming up over the horizon in cyber and OT and all this?
Yeah, great question. I think something that I'm very excited by is our ability to, right, it's the advent of machine learning, right? And I use that specifically to say I still think we're in the beginning stages here. Yep. I don't think this is a solved or a deployed technology by and large. What I'm interested in, though, is, again, having those tools, having the products that we can integrate machines to help us out, have those employed to help the human at the end of the day. Again, to not replace them. I think there's an enormous opportunity for us to use machine learning to help inform defined workflows, right? Maybe a portion of machine learning helps to identify inefficiencies in our workflows. I don't have the right information. But being able to help kind of side saddle where the security operator fits into the larger picture, I think is a really interesting area for us to explore, right? Reducing the barrier of our current cyber operators and process operators today. I think that provides a ripe opportunity to apply some machine learning capability there. On the kind of flip side of that, so I'll use the same thing for both maybe. The concern that I have on that is the trustworthiness of data. When we're looking at adversarial applications to machine learning algorithms, to the outcomes that they provide, how can I attack the underlying infrastructure to guide certain outcomes that align with my agenda? I think that's something that we really need to be cautious of. And at each step of the way, understanding when we bring in technology, we may be abstracting some visibility away. And if we're not critically thinking about, I'm just going to go look at that box and it tells me, you're good here to go, you're good to go. I want to know, why is it telling me I'm good to go? Right? Can you show me, irrefutable evidence, right? And non-repudiated sources that the data that I'm seeing is something I should be trusting at this time in my life right now. Sure. That is an enormous challenge that I think we need to be putting some more critical thought into right now. Misinformation is a real thing. And if we're not trusting the information that's being provided to me at a real time, the actions that I'm taking from a cybersecurity perspective may potentially do more harm than good.
Yeah, I'm starting from a false assumption, and then I'm taking actions based on those assumptions, and that wasn't in the right place. So using your driving your car analogy, I'm in Austin, but I think I'm in Dallas. So I'm taking directions thinking I'm starting in Dallas, but I'm not going to get where I'm wanting to go because that's not where I started.
That's right. You'll end up in Florida real quick, and I'll tell you, you're going the right way.
That's right. That's right. It can be painful and long, and it can take you expensive. Like all the things go into that. So. Well, awesome, Nick. So, hey, man, I appreciate the time. So why don't you tell us a little bit, I know you guys have a conference coming up. I know there's a lot of things going on. So why don't you kind of give us all, we'll include links in the show notes as well. So now's your time to spiel all the stuff that you want people to know about you.
Yeah, no, great. I appreciate that. Few events coming up for sure. The one thing, that I'll open up with, we've received a lot of good feedback from the community to date. We'll include an email address, ot@mitre.org. We're actively soliciting where the community would see additional benefit here, right? With our first release, we had a subset of the entire suite of functionality for just a few small 3 protocols. We've already received requests to extend functionality to go deeper within some of those protocols, also extending out into other protocols. So with our a future release here, we will be bringing more out to the open source community. We are actively eliciting where additional use cases can be helpful here. So if you want to partner up, you want to provide feedback, we're all ears. We'll pass along the email address and certainly look to get additional feedback. The other piece, you may see the team out executing a little bit of a demonstrator unit. We had a really good showing at DEF CON, at SANS ICS earlier this year. Really what we want to do is demonstrate that the hands-on keyboard is a lower barrier to entry than I think a lot of people are seeing right now. So please be on the lookout for the circuit. We'll drop some information to future events for us. And being able to meet with the team and get hands-on keyboard, if that's of interest to you, we're here for it. So very much looking forward to again eliciting any feedback you'll have out there, and we're acting on it. So look forward to continuing engaging with the community here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I look forward to getting my hands on it and playing with it. I'd love to see it, and I'm sure we'll cross paths at a conference not too long from now. So. Well, thank you again, Nick. I appreciate your time today. Great information. Everybody, we'll put all the notes or links in the show notes for you to follow up and find all the things about MITRE and Caldera for OT and all that is. So definitely start thinking about how you can incorporate that into your OT spaces, get the right people to make sure they're reaching out with suggestions, put in your protocol, your use case, and get that added if it's not already there. So it's a great use and a great thing for us. Rising tides raise all ships. So I'm excited about it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for all y'all are doing, and look forward to seeing you in person someday soon, sir.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast. If you got some valuable information from today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Aaron and to get your free copy of the OT Cybersecurity Solution Buyer's Guide, go to industrialdefender.com. That's industrialdefender.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.